Alright, my friends, let me show you how sad we can make the Oathbreaker Knight just by making normal attacks. Notice that we're spending no resources. The only buff we have is an Elixir of Vigilance, and that's just to stop our party members from going first. So let's go ahead and make an attack. I'm actually going to not use my Swarmkeeper Ranger abilities immediately, because we want to stack up our save DCs with Arcane Acuity, and then let's go ahead and do this again. We've got advantage on this one, and then we're going to use Mighty Blinding Swarm. The Oathbreaker Knight is on the ground, has Radiating Orbs, Guiding Bolt, Prone, Reverberation, Blinded, Slowed, and is stuck on an ice surface, and we can do that turn after turn after turn. Alright, let's get to the build. Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering my pick for the best Swarmkeeper Ranger build in Baldur's Gate 3. This debuffing-focused character leaves enemies cowering and helpless on the ground, unable to resist being harried to extinction by thousands of tiny stings. You are relentless, never needing to rest, and every attack that you make drains the power of your enemies, making them easy prey for you and your allies. In addition to all of this great debuffing, we also do strong, consistent damage turn after turn after turn, and have great utility skills and spells, so are an excellent contributor out of combat as well, and we get to use some of Baldur's Gate's most powerful mechanics in very unique and interesting ways. Before I begin, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to Tarantula for the $5 donation, Wanda Husbando for the £10, Caramelized Onion for the €10, and The One With Pants and Kong for becoming channel members. Thanks so much, my friends. I really do appreciate the support. Great names this time as well, and it really does mean a lot. Alright, let's get swarming. We're using Minsc here as the example character because he is the ranger of the party for this ranger build, though, to be honest, a debuffing-focused archer isn't exactly what I first think of for Minsc, so from a flavor perspective, you can use this build for any companion that you feel it works for, or build this for a custom character or one of Withers' hirelings. If you are building this as a custom character, the strongest race to pick is almost certainly Dwergar. Their out-of-combat invisibility that they get at level 5 will allow you to position yourself perfectly before combat begins, which gives you a huge advantage for laying out all of your debuffs before enemies get to act, and can trigger surprise rounds, which are extremely effective. Other great options include Wood Elf or Half Wood Elf for the bonus movement speed, Githyanki for the once per day Misty Step, and the doubling down on out-of-combat skills with Astral Knowledge, and Gnome, because this character is going to be extremely hard to kill with physical damage, so Gnome's advantage on mental saving throws patches its only minor weakness, making it an extremely safe character. Halfling, of course, is always an amazing option for every character making attack rolls or rolling dice at all, which is every character, so always a great pick as well. As part of my simple class build series, we're going to be focusing on a mono-class Swarmkeeper Ranger build, though honestly I think that is the best way to build this class as well. Your best abilities with Swarmkeeper show up at level 11, so you're highly incentivized to continue taking levels in Ranger to reach that very powerful Capstone ability. And a lot of multi-class builds will prefer a different Ranger subclass or another class entirely in order to get the same sort of things that Swarmkeeper would give them. So you usually are going to be building this class monoclass if you want to build Swarmkeeper Ranger. For our favored enemy selection, so of course we're going to start with Ranger. For our favored enemy selection, we're going to go with Bounty Hunter. This character is going to be trying to debuff enemies, and one of the best ways to do that is with the Ensnaring Strike spell. It's an extremely powerful debuff that prevents enemies from moving. Giving them disadvantage on their saving throws means that they will be unable to fight back against you as you shoot them from range, because you are very, very likely for them to fail their save. This character will have high wisdom, meaning that the save DC will be as good as a full spellcaster on effects like Ensnaring Strike. So a full save DC, disadvantaged, extremely powerful lockdown spell in the early game is going to be an extremely dangerous tool, better than the things that your spellcasters have, and then also it comes, of course, with damage from archery. For our natural explorer selection, we're going to take Wasteland Wanderer Fire. Fire is the most common of these three damage types, and we want resistance to all of them. One of the great things that this character gets is we have very high armor class, we're debuffing enemies, we can play from range because we're a ranged build. So we're very, very difficult to kill with weapon attacks because our AC is really high, and we are just not taking a lot of weapon attacks, making it a very safe character for honor mode. In addition to that, we get to be extremely tanky in a second way because we have all of these damage resistances, so that makes a Swarmkeeper Ranger a remarkably difficult character for enemies to take down, especially combined with your mobility and additional disruptive tools from our swarms. Finally, for our ability scores, this character gets to be extremely greedy because we only really care about 3 attributes at all, and we only need 2 of them to be particularly high. So we're going to take 17 dexterity, 16 wisdom, and 15 in constitution. If you really want a little bit of additional jump distance and carry weight, of course, then you can take the 16, 14, 16 split and have 12 strength to start with, and then respec to the 17, 14, 15 later on. For simplicity's sake, I'm just going to show these stats with the odd numbers from the beginning, but that is a very slight optimization. This lets us get our 3 attributes to as high as possible, meaning that we can have the highest possible scores. So we'll have great hit points, great armor class, and of course our damage and hit chance is based on dexterity, and the save DCs of our spells will be as high as possible, and all of the other effects that we're applying key off of wisdom as well. So high wisdom lets us apply those extremely consistently. For our skill selection here, we definitely want stealth and we want perception. Those are the 2 most important skills for us to pick. If you are taking a background that gives you sleight of hand, this character is also very capable of doing that because, of course, it's a dexterity-based character. You likely will not want to pick up dialogue skills, though you can pick up insight, for example, because it sometimes comes up outside of dialogue, or if you happen to be speaking in dialogue, but you're not usually going to be passing those on this character. But perception, because of our high wisdom, is extremely important, and stealth is going to allow us to stay out of combat or cause enemies to die before they notice us, which is, of course, extremely powerful. Having proficiency in acrobatics can prevent enemies from shoving you. That usually won't happen, but is a nice little safety bubble as well, and since this character is so safe, cutting off even the marginal ways that you can potentially lose is very helpful. That's all the decisions that we have to make at level 1. Let's move on to level 2. At character level 2, we get to choose our fighting style, and of course, as an archery character, we're going to take archery fighting style. Not only is this just a really powerful boost, it's one of the major draws of being an archer in the first place. No other weapon type gets just a flat +2 bonus to hit. And the only thing that we really care about with this character is hitting our attacks, because that's going to allow us to apply our debuffs as frequently and reliably as possible, so that we can shut down enemies very easily. So archery, obviously, it's the natural pick for this character, but it's also just incredible. I can't overstate how good this ability is. We also get to pick 2 spells, and of course, one of them we already know. I already talked about how good Ensnaring Strike is for this character. It's a strength save, and there's a lot of early game enemies with low strength saving throws, so you can hit them with Ensnaring Strike and cause them to take additional damage and stop moving. In addition to that, we can pick up Hunter's Mark, which is also a concentration spell. This is 2 concentration spells, so you have to choose between them. But this is just great consistent damage throughout the day, extremely helpful, and for our Swarmkeeper Ranger will allow us to increase our damage even further using the Swarmkeeper abilities, because of how those work. So we effectively get double value out of Hunter's Mark with this character. At level 3, we get to choose our subclass, which of course is going to be the Swarmkeeper Ranger. Now, Swarmkeeper Ranger at this level gets a number of abilities. So firstly, we get Mage Hand, which is a very useful cantrip. You can use this to throw healing potions at your allies, or bottles of water or bombs at your enemies. Bottles of water being thrown at your enemies is very efficient for this character because we have a lot of potential lightning damage if we choose that swarm. So if you're in a party that is doing wet and cold effects, where you need to hit an enemy with the wet effect and then hit them with cold or lightning damage, which then gets doubled, having Mage Hand on more characters just makes that significantly better. We also get Fairy Fire. We're usually not going to spend a spell slot on this. It's not particularly strong, and we have better ways to gain advantage on our attacks. And we get Praise Scent, where if we choose the damage mode of our swarms, it deals double damage to enemies that are Hunter's Marked. We're going to be Hunter's Marking most enemies that we're attacking, unless we're ensnaring them. So anytime we want to do damage to them, we'll get double value out of that, which is, of course, excellent. In addition to that, we also get to choose which swarm we're picking, whether that's bees, jellyfish, or moths. Now, you can swap between these anytime you level up or, of course, respec. So this isn't a permanent choice. You can always change it if you decide that you prefer a different one. And all three of them have their strong points. Each of them gives you 3 abilities that you can use once per turn, so you can choose between any of those 3 abilities. 2 of those 3 abilities are the same for all 3 swarms. You can do an extra d6 of damage, or 2d6 if that enemy is Hunter's Mark. Bees does piercing damage, jellyfish does lightning damage, moths does psychic damage. Of these, the most relevant one is, of course, lightning damage, because in the early game, it's fairly easy to get enemies wet and double that lightning damage, so from a pure damage perspective, jellyfish is the swarm to pick. The third, you can also teleport yourself a very short distance. This is better than it sounds, because it's a free teleport that you can use every turn, and you can use it in addition to moving, so you can use it to kite enemies infinitely, because if they are moving their movement speed, and you're moving your movement speed plus a teleport every single turn, then you're going to stay ahead of them basically forever. So you can use that, especially in combination with other effects that increase your movement speed, to make sure that you're always staying ahead of enemies. You can also use it to get up on high ground, go through walls, and things like that. There's a lot of different tactical options that this gives you, so don't underestimate it. Any mobility, even short-range mobility, is super strong. Finally, each of them has a debuff that you can apply to an enemy. For bees, it's a knockback, so you push the enemy 15 feet backwards. This is extremely useful if you are playing in a party with a lot of hazardous effects. So if you have allies that are casting effects like Spike Growth, Wall of Fire, Cloud of Daggers, Hunger of Hadar, and so on, then bees makes an excellent pick because you can push enemies back into it. For that reason, if you have a warlock ally, I recommend taking bees as your swarm, and as you'll see, which is the best swarm depends on what your allies are doing. Jellyfish can shock enemies, preventing them from reacting. This is extremely useful, of course, to prevent enemies from making opportunity attacks, which of course is great to get this character out of melee range of an enemy. You'll have to make the attack with disadvantage, but that can often work out fine, or to move other characters around, and can prevent a lot of dangerous effects on honor mode as well, and things like counterspells and that. Shock is a decent debuff. It's not the strongest in the world, but it is pretty powerful. Generally, I recommend Jellyfish, though, mostly if you are building a party centered around lightning and cold damage, because then you can just be the highest damage version of this character while also having a very relevant debuff. Finally, Moths lets you blind enemies. Now this is the most powerful of the 3 debuffs, but unfortunately in Baldur's Gate, the effectiveness of blind, a 1-turn duration blind, because all of these are 1-turn duration debuffs, is held back by a bug or a weird way that the game calculates effect durations. Blinds, except from the blindness spell, tick their duration down at the beginning of a character's turn. So a 1-turn blind never lasts 1 turn. Enemies will become unblinded as soon as their turn starts. That means that this blind doesn't actually stop enemies from hitting you, unfortunately, which is very annoying, and I wish they would fix that. I also highly encourage using mods to fix that duration issue, because I don't think it's supposed to work that way. But it's still a pretty powerful tool, because it gives you advantage on all of your allies' attacks for that whole round, and acts as a pseudo-shock, because enemies who can't see you often can't react to you anyways, so the blind is still a really powerful debuff. So, to sum up, if you have allies who are using a lot of hazardous terrain, go bees and push enemies back into it. If you have allies that are using wet and cold effects, go jellyfish for more damage. And if you have, for just a generically powerful choice, or if you have allies that are making a lot of attack rolls, go moths. For this character. For the example, we're going to go ahead and pick Moths, and then for our spell selection here, if you need the utility spells like Long Strider and Enhanced Sleep, you should probably get those on another character where you don't have to spend a spell known slot on them, but you can still grab them here. Or you can pick something like Fog Cloud, which is a no-save blind, so a debuff without saving throws, again, fits with our debuffing plan. At character level 4, we get to take our first feat, and the feat that we're going to take, because we're an archer build, is of course Sharpshooter. Sharpshooter is just an amazing pick for every archery character. Increasing our damage output is incredible. Now, I will say that it is less important to pick Sharpshooter at level 4 for this archer than for others. So if you're a player who really dislikes taking Sharpshooter early, and I know there are many players who dislike that, then taking an ability score improvement and delaying Sharpshooter is still a totally fine option, because this character mostly cares about landing its attacks. It's less damage focused than other archery builds, but the best debuff is still dead, so increasing our damage output is always going to be excellent, and we're very good at landing sharpshooter shots. Enemies will almost always be blinded when we're making our second attack in a turn, so we're going to be having advantage on a lot of attacks, and we'll usually make our first attack from stealth, so we'll have advantage for that reason as well. And we have archery fighting style, so sharpshooter is going to increase our damage output by so much that for an archer build, I simply wouldn't leave home without this feat. At character level 5, we get extra attack, which of course doubles our damage output, always incredible, and gives us a second chance to use our Swarmkeeper abilities if we missed with our first attack. You can only use the Swarmkeeper abilities once per turn, no matter how many attacks you hit with, but if you miss with your first attack, you definitely want a second chance to use these super powerful tools, so extra attack makes us way more consistent, and also lets us apply our passive debuffs to multiple enemies, spreading the pain around the battlefield. We also get Web, which is a very solid spell for this character. Our save DCs on our spells are as high as many full casters at this point, because we have 16 Wisdom. So you can lock enemies down and then shoot them over time, and if you go Bees Swarm, then you can push enemies back into the web. In fact, I highly recommend that at this point, because you've probably gotten a lot of damage over time effects or hazardous terrain effects, that you swap to Legion of Bees starting at level 5, because you get both web and spike growth as effects that you want to push enemies back into. So that gives you a huge amount of additional crowd control for pushing enemies around. Of course, jellyfish and moths are still both great options, so you can definitely stay with them, but swapping to bees gives you a little bit more in the way of tools for shoving enemies back into your hazardous terrain, especially if your allies are doing that as well. At Ranger level 6, we get to choose another favored enemy and another natural explorer, and the favored enemy that we're going to pick here is Ranger Knight. There aren't that many heavy armor pieces in the game that we want, but Grimm's Helm in particular is very good for us, and we'll probably have it around this level, so getting heavy armor proficiency can be very helpful. And there's a couple other heavy armors that are pretty interesting, so just having the option is good, and also none of these other abilities do anything at all, so even though this one's kind of marginal, it's still the best choice. For Natural Explorer here, we're going to go ahead and take Cold. It's the second most common of these 3 damage types after Fire, so getting resistance to it is going to be the most important and makes us even tankier. At character level 7, you get access to a new Swarmkeeper Ranger ability, Writhing Tide. You get 3 uses of Writhing Tide per day, and it lets you... Well, the tooltip here is not super helpful, but I'll tell you exactly how this ability works. So, Writhing Current, you get 3 uses of it per day, and you can use it as a bonus action to fly up to 30 feet, not the 10 feet listed in this tooltip. Again, these tooltips are not great. Fly up to 30 feet and become immune to surface effects. You can repeat this action every turn for 10 turns. So, for a bonus action, you fly 30 feet, you get immunity to surface effects, which includes effects like your own spike growth, as well as ice surfaces, plant growth, all of which this character will be creating a lot of, and other things like acid or fire or whatever that might be on the ground. An important thing to know about this is that the immunity to surface effects isn't applied when you initially cast this ability until after you land for the first time. So don't use it to fly directly into your own spike growth, but you can fly to the edge and then walk onto the spike growth very safely, and then enemies will have to come into your spike growth in order to get you, and then every turn thereafter, you just have perfect immunity to surface effects. It's a little bit of a buggy ability, unfortunately, which I guess is appropriate for Swarmkeeper Ranger, but as long as you don't use it on the initial cast to fly directly into a surface, you'll be fine. And it's a very powerful tool for an archery character, especially one who's otherwise debuffing enemies significantly, to be able to stand inside your own spike growth, because enemies with their slowed and battered bodies are going to have to crawl through it in order to get to you. We also get an additional spell here, and at this point, what spell we take is a little bit less important because we're mostly going to be using our other spells, but I like having Silence in a party. It's a ritual spell, so if you cast it before combat starts, then it doesn't cost a spell slot, which can be very useful in some scenarios. It also doesn't matter that we're taking a lot of concentration spells because we're going to use them in the best situations for those concentration spells. Of course, you can also go back for Enhanced Leap and Long Strider if you don't have those two extremely powerful utility spells as well. At character level 8, we get Landstride, Difficult Terrain. Again, a way that we can get onto areas where enemies can't easily follow us without even having to use one of our Writhing Current abilities. And we also get another feat. The feat that we're going to take is, of course, an ability score improvement to even out our ability scores, giving us a nice boost to our hit points, as well as to our armor class, hit chance, and damage. At character level 9, we get 3rd level spells, as well as another use of Writhing Current. And we also get Gaseous Form as a spell known. This usually isn't worth spending a 3rd level spell slot on, but there are some fun things you can do with it, like passing through the bars of a jail cell or something like that. And of course, you can go through the small pipes and things when you're in Gaseous Form as well, so has some out-of-combat utility and can be used to put you out over like a big lake of lava where enemies can't get to you as well. For our spell selection at this level, we're going to take Plant Growth. This is a non-concentration spell, it's a surface effect, and it counts as difficult terrain, so you're immune to it even without Writhing Current, thanks to Landstride. And quartering enemy movement speed is absolutely brutal. Melee enemies just can't deal with Plant Growth, especially if you have a way to prevent them from jumping out of it, which, of course, if you have an ally which if you are casting like a fog cloud on them, they won't be able to, or if you have an ally casting effects like Hunger of Hadar, they won't be able to because they can't jump where they can't see. At character level 10, we get another favored enemy and another natural explorer, and of course we're going to take Mage Breaker so we can get True Strike and annoy people in the YouTube comments. For our natural explorer pick, we're going to go ahead and pick Wasteland Wanderer Poison, getting us damage reduction or damage resistance to yet another damage type. There aren't that many enemies that poison in the late game, but there's a few, and having poison resistance makes us even tankier. And again, with our high armor class and easy positioning tools with this character, we will be taking very little damage. Having the incoming damage makes it even harder for us to ever possibly die. Now, at level 11, we get our Capstone ability. This is super powerful for all of the Ranger subclasses, and Swarmkeeper is no exception. We get the Mighty Swarm ability. Our Swarm has grown stronger. Swarm's regular attack now does a d8 damage, and funnily enough, the extra damage from Hunter's Mark is still a d6, so it's now 1d8 plus 1d6. That's obviously totally irrelevant. The going from a d6 once per turn to a d8 once per turn doesn't matter at all. And teleporting with our Swarm also gives us +2 armor class, which is pretty useful. If you're teleporting, you're probably in a sort of more defensive posture in that combat, so additional AC is very, very useful. However, the real thing is that the special attack of your Swarm gets an additional feature. The Swarms get... For bees, you get the knockback as well as knock prone. So this is obviously incredibly effective. Pushing enemies back 15 feet and knocking them prone is pretty equivalent to preventing them from moving at all, because it's going to take half of their movement speed to stand back up, and then they are 17 feet further away from you, so they won't be able to get to you regardless. Also, knocking enemies prone is incredibly powerful in Baldur's Gate because it breaks concentration without a saving throw and all sorts of other things. It also prevents enemies from reacting if they're prone, so it's effectively getting the shock effect from the cloud of jellyfish in addition to the knockback of bees. Jellyfish gains disarm in addition to shock. And a disarm, of course, is really good. There's a lot of enemies in the late game with very, very powerful weapons. So being able to knock those out of their hands is excellent. It will cause them to waste a lot of turns, and in combination with the shock can, again, trivialize a lot of late game boss fights. Finally, Moths gets, in addition to the blind, which, remember, the blind only lasts until the beginning of the enemy turn, so is less good than it sounds. It also gets slow, like the spell effect, limiting enemies to one action, slowing their movement speed, lowering their armor class and dex saves. It is a tremendously powerful debuff, and there's also very few enemies who are immune to it, because it's not considered a full stun or anything like that. So enemies that are immune to other effects will not be immune to slow, including some of the most dangerous bosses in the game. The slow does not go away at the beginning of enemies' turns. The duration on that works properly, so they're slowed for a full turn. And slow for one turn, every single turn for free with your attacks, is incredibly strong. So in the late game, when you hit level 11, I recommend switching back to Moths, because slowing an enemy every single turn whenever you fire is just that good, and easily can win you a lot of boss fights that would be very, very difficult otherwise. We also get a spell here, and this spell mostly does not matter at all. You can pick Protection from Energy for if you're going into a fight where an enemy is doing a type of damage that you're not naturally resistant to, or you can pick Conjure Barrage or Lightning Arrow if you just want to goof around and have fun. These spells aren't very good, but they are very fun to cast, so you can use them if you are just enjoying yourself. Pass Without Trace is also nice if you plan to do greater invisibility shenanigans. This character can cast Pass Without Trace on itself while an ally casts greater invis, and then you can make the stealth checks extremely easily. And finally, at character level 12, we're going to go ahead and take another feat to max out our dexterity so that we hit our attacks and do everything even better. Obviously, get to 20 dexterity and still have 16 wisdom is one of the great things about this character, because it makes your effects much more likely to land. Alright, my friends, that is the Swarmkeeper Ranger. To be honest, I found it a little difficult to do something cool with this class until I thought of hitting on the idea of maximum debuffing, and so that's what we're going to be focusing on with our items, which we're going to get to now. For items for this character, there are two main goals: staying alive ourselves and causing enemies as much distress as possible. So in the early game, of course, we need a weapon, and we're actually going to deviate from the normal archer builds, which are very, very set with which weapon they use, and use two weapons that you see a little less frequently. We can either use the Bow of the Banshee, which gives us the chance to inflict Frightened with every single attack. When we hit an enemy, they have to make a DC 12 wisdom save or they become frightened. Now, a DC 12 wisdom save is not that high, so enemies will pass this pretty regularly, but frightened is an extremely powerful condition, preventing enemies from moving, and we gain additional bonus to attack and damage against those frightened enemies, so we will be able to continue to gain power while enemies are losing power over time. And it happens on every single attack, which is really powerful, because when you have that many tries, enemies are going to miss their rolls occasionally. The other great option is to use Herald, and if we have more spellcasting allies, we may want to use this instead, because Herald, very similarly, applies a debuff every single time we hit an enemy with a weapon attack. In this case, they have to make a DC 13 Charisma save, or they become Baned. Baned reduces their attack rolls and saving throws by 1d4, and one thing that's really important about this is that this is the first thing that happens when you hit an enemy. So any other saving throw effect that we apply with this attack, including those from our Swarmkeeper Rangers or from our Ranger abilities or from our other weapons and items, will have that penalty applied to it. So it's going to make landing our debuffs much, much more reliable if we're using Herald. So you can use this to buff up your allies' crowd control as well as buff up your own, or you can use the Bow of the Banshee to try to lock enemies in place. In a more generic party, the Bow of the Banshee, I think, is a little bit stronger, but if you have a lot of spellcasting allies, Herald is going to be excellent. In the late game, you can keep using these bows. You'll need to use oils of accuracy or things like that because +1 weapons in the late game are going to start missing a little more frequently, but there are ways to offset that. Or you can upgrade to one of the late game bows, either the Deadshot for maximum accuracy, or this is also a character where, as an archer, we can actually use Gaunter Mail very effectively. Normally, this legendary bow takes sort of a backseat to the Titan String or the Deadshot, because both of those do more damage in general, thanks to the critical hit accuracy of the Deadshot or the bonus damage of Titan String. But this character isn't built around damage, we're built around landing debuffs, and haste is really good for us, and Promise Victory gives enemies a DC 15 save, or they get Guiding Bolt inflicted on them for yet more debuffing. Not only does this make it easier for our allies to hit them in yet another way, it also applies a condition to those enemies, and a bunch of other items that we have care about applying conditions, so it lets us stack our debuffs even more. So normally a weapon that, unfortunately, despite being a legendary bow, takes a little bit of a backseat to the other bows in the game, this character gets to make excellent use of it. In addition to our weapon, of course, we need armor, and there's sort of two different routes that we can go for endgame armor. We can either use the Armor of Agility for maximum AC. This lets us get really high AC, great saving throws as well, and makes us extremely difficult to kill. Or, of course, we can use the Ballast Armor. Most of our damage is piercing damage, especially if we choose bees as our swarm type, so giving enemies vulnerability using the Ballast Armor is going to increase our damage output enormously. I think there are better Ballast Armor carriers because, again, we don't care that much about our damage for this character, so I recommend the Armor of Agility, but since this is a pretty contested piece of armor, then this can also easily be your Ballast Armor character if you're going that route. Also, any other items like the Ring of Protection that increase your AC and saving throws make you even harder to kill. And because we're a ranger and have shield proficiency, we can just use a shield, and for that I recommend the Sentinel Shield. This character only gets +5 to initiative, and we don't get alert, and that is a little lower than I like for the endgame, so the Sentinel Shield lets us get bonus to armor class, putting us at 24 base armor class with just this and the Armor of Agility, so really solid armor class, and also giving us +3 to our initiative, guaranteeing that we go before most enemies in the game. We also get other melee weapons, and the best one to have in our main hand is going to be Rhapsody. This character's abilities all benefit from increasing our spell save DCs, so Rhapsody, as we stack Scarlet Remittance, which is very easy, will get us up to +3 to our save DCs, as well as to our attack rolls, really nice. And damage, less important, but still very useful, so will allow us to apply those debuffs even more reliably and powerfully. For our hats, in the early game, we care mostly about accuracy, so the Marksmanship hat is great. The Grimskull Helm gives us an extra stack of Hunter's Mark or an extra cast of Hunter's Mark every day, which we want to cast a lot on this character, so is really nice and prevents critical hits. So this is a nice piece that we can use on this character as well. And then, of course, once we get it, we can use the Helmet of Arcane Acuity. We're going to be making weapon attacks all the time, and both our spells and our Swarmkeeper Ranger abilities and several of our items get benefits from increasing our character's save DC, so Arcane Acuity stacks we can use on this character, and it's kind of nice to use them on this character because we're using them in a way that isn't just cheesily breaking the game and sort of ruining the fun because enemies can never pass saving throws against your commands or whatever. This is much more how I think Arcane Acuity was envisioned by the developers as being an interesting ability to use, so we can use it on this character to stack it and then cast dangerous effects like Ensnaring Strike or just our Swarmkeeper abilities much more reliably, so I think that makes a great use for this item that I personally dislike sometimes because it makes the game too easy, but for this character is pretty awesome. Speaking of effects that care about our save DCs, we get to use the great trick with the Snowburst Ring, which creates a 15-foot ice circle whenever we deal cold damage, and the Drakethroat Glaive to enchant whatever bow we're using with cold damage. So if we fire an arrow when we have cold damage attached to it, and have the Snowburst Ring, we will create an ice surface under enemies every time. Then when they move, they're going to have to pass a dexterity save against our save DC, boosted by Arcane Acuity, etc., or they fall over, and that is going to stun enemies turn after turn after turn, because when they fall over on their turn, they lose the rest of their turn. We also have Writhing Currents to become immune to surface effects, so we can ignore all of the ice that we're creating around the battlefield. We can also, of course, use other debuffing items that are a little more hotly contested. So if you have another character that wants these, then you may be more interested in putting them on that character. But this character has tremendous synergy with the Boots of Stormy Clamor and the Gloves of Belligerent Skies, because stacking Reverberation on enemies decreases their Constitution saving throw, which, if you're using the Moth's Swarm, the saving throw against the slow and blind effects are Constitution. The reverb gets applied before they make the Moth's save effect. So again, you get to have enemies make their saving throws at a severe penalty and become slowed and blinded much more frequently if you're using the Gloves of Belligerent Skies and the Boots of Stormy Clamor. Since you're using those anyways, you want the Callous Glow Ring to trigger the Gloves of Belligerent Skies. We're applying conditions constantly for the boots, so those will go off frequently. And when you have those, you can also use the Luminous Armor as your armor if you want to play a little bit more close ranged, or you can put that on a cleric that's doing Spirit Guardians or another more radiant damage focused character. But these gloves, the reverb set is excellent for this character. If you have these on a different character instead, you can always use an item like the Dark Justiciar Gauntlets. Something that is important is not to light your weapons on fire and not to use gloves that do extra fire damage, because that will melt the ice surface that you're creating with the Snowburst Ring. So the Dark Justiciar Gauntlets are the best way to increase your damage at range, since they don't provide fire damage, unlike the Helldust Gloves or Flawed Helldust Gloves, for example. So basically, you're looking for items that apply debuffs when you hit an enemy, items that increase your save DCs to make those debuffs apply more frequently, and items that keep you alive. And these, my ideal endgame setup for this character is going to be the helmet. We're going to have Drakethroat Glaive and Snowburst Ring. You're going to use these gloves as well, and these boots, as well as the Armor of Agility, Rhapsody, and the Sentinel Shield, and then our weapon is going to be Gaunter Mail. For our amulet, it doesn't particularly matter, though this character does get some cool benefits out of amulets like this Strange Tendril amulet that is randomly equipped. I didn't put it here specially for the build. But it does get some benefits out of scrolls and items that provide debuffing spells. Since we're stacking our save DC anyways, we can double cast things because we have haste from Gaunter Mail, so we can shoot our attacks and then cast a spell using Arcane Acuity stacks if we want to. We can use scrolls extremely effectively on this character also. Another really nice tool for this character, if you're going for that route, is to take the Illithid Power Ability Drain, because this will apply another condition on every attack and reduce enemy dexterity, since we're attacking with dexterity. That will allow us to stack our debuffs even more and reduce enemy armor class, initiative, if you hit them with it before combat starts, and of course often their attack rolls and damage, as well as their ability to pass dex saves, including those from the ice surfaces that we're creating with the Snowburst Ring. So Ability Drain, super synergistic for this character, and again, for a debuffing archer, is an ability that I would look out for if you are doing Illithid powers. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoy shooting your enemies with arrows until they just can't do anything anymore and making them cry. As always, of course, if you have enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a comment and hit like. Helps me out with the algorithm, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 build guides and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, friends. I'll catch you next time.